The Russian people have stood up. The people of Novorossiya, the people of Donbass, they have stood up. They will not abide by, they will not sit idly by as they are being placed under the threat of economic warfare, of military warfare, and of the just absolutely disgusting conditions that came about. Vladimir Putin said hungry, cold, right, starving. The life expectancy in Russia declined for men by like 8 years in a rapid period of time. It would decline, I think, 1 year for every year after the Soviet Union fell from 1991 to 1999. This was the situation in the Soviet Union. People lost everything overnight. People had nothing overnight. I mean, this was a catastrophe. And so no more. That will never happen again, according to Putin here. The West is ready to cross every line to preserve the neocolonial system, which allows it to live off the world, to plunder it thanks to the domination of the dollar and technology, to collect an actual tribute from humanity, to extract its primary source of unearned prosperity, the rent paid to the hegemon. The preservation of this annuity is their main, real, and absolutely self-serving motivation. This is why total desovereigntization is in their interest. This explains their aggression towards independent states, traditional values, and authentic cultures, their attempts to undermine international integration processes, new global currencies, and technological development centers they cannot control. It is critically important for them to force all countries to surrender their sovereignty to the United States. So right here, directly going after the United States, saying the United States is leading a neo-colonial system. He's right. The United States is leading a neo-colonial system, trying to destroy any possibility of sovereignty, because the sovereignty, self-determination, integration projects like the Belt and Road Initiative, the Eurasian Economic Union, which Russia leads, the Belt and Road Initiative, which China leads, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, BRICS, the BRICS Alliance. I mean, all of these multilateral institutions, not led by the United States and the West, are a threat to the continued dominance of the dollar and all that the dollar represents, the imperialist hegemony of the United States. So let's continue. In certain countries, the ruling elites voluntarily agree to do this, voluntarily agree to become vassals. Others are bribed and intimidated. If this does not work, they destroy entire states, leaving behind humanitarian disasters, devastation, ruins, millions of wrecked and mangled human lives, terrorist enclaves, social disaster zones, protectorates, colonies, and semi-colonies. They don't care. All they care about is their benefit. I want to underscore that, again, that their insatiability and determination to preserve their unfettered dominance are the real causes behind the hybrid war that the collective West is waging against Russia. They do not want us to be free. They want us to be a colony. They do not want equal cooperation. They want to loot. They do not want to see us as a free society. They want a mass of soulless slaves. They see our thought and philosophy as a direct threat. That's why they target our philosophers for assassination. That's a direct reference to Alexander Dugin, which is interesting because in the past, the government largely stayed away from references to Alexander Dugin, but his daughter was assassinated. Our culture and art present a danger to them, so they're trying to ban them. Our development and prosperity are also a threat to them because competition is growing. They do not want or need Russia, but we do. So, I mean, this in particular, right? The ruling elites, he's talking about Europe here, voluntarily agree to be subservient, but then others are bribed and intimidated, mostly probably talking about the global south, but this happens in Europe too, and he gets to that. So they destroy states. This is the United States he's talking about. He's talking about the humanitarian disasters. He's talking about Libya. He's talking about the devastation, the ruin, millions of wrecked and mangled human lives. I mean, Iraq alone, Afghanistan, hello? I mean, this is what he's talking about. He's talking about the hypocrisy of the West, the hypocrisy of the imperialist West led by the United States to lecture Russia in attempt to undermine its sovereignty is just underscoring exactly what it really is. And there is not many world leaders willing to do this. I've heard Xi Jinping talk about imperialism, Bashar al-Assad talk about imperialism, but this is a very direct, this is how you can tell that the escalation in Ukraine, right? This was a red line and it's being crossed. And the rhetoric, the language, the ideology has not necessarily changed, because I think there are many countries that share this opinion. But to go out on the world stage, right, to address the government and do so understanding an international audience would be watching, shows that now is a time not to bide time, not to sit and wait around, but to assert, right, to assert your interests. And that's what Putin is doing here, and Russia is doing. So the West is counting on impunity, on being able to get away with anything. As a matter of fact, this was the case until recently. Strategic security agreements have been trashed. Agreements reached at the highest political level have been declared tall tales. Firm promises not to expand NATO to the east gave way to dirty deception as soon as the former leaders bought into them. Missile defense, intermediate range, and short range missile treaties have been unilaterally dismantled under far-fetched pretexts. And all we hear is the West is insisting on a rules-based order. Where did that come from anyway? Who has ever seen these rules? Who agreed or approved to them? Listen, this is just a lot of nonsense, utter deceit, double standards, and even triple standards. They must think we're stupid. So where's the lie here? The United States says it's for a rules-based international order. The West says it follows what the United States does, but it's hypocrisy. It's lies. So, oftentimes Vladimir Putin is talked about as this boogeyman, as someone who doesn't have any sense. Does this sound like someone who doesn't have any sense to you? To me, it seems like Putin, and as a reflection of the Russian government, there's a lot of sense going on here. That the rules-based international order that the U.S. claims to lead actually not only doesn't exist, but really is just deception and mythology. The United States rules-based international order is just U.S. hegemony. It's just U.S. domination of the planet. Russia is a great 1,000-year-old power, a whole civilization. It's not going to live by such makeshift false rules, so a complete rejection. It was the so-called West that trampled on the principle of inviolability of borders and is now deciding as its own discretion who has the right to self-determination and who does not, who is unworthy of it. It is clear what their decisions are based on or who gave them the right to decide in the first place. They just assumed it. This is why the choice of the people in Crimea, Sevastopol, Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson makes them so furiously angry. The West does not have any moral right to weigh in or even utter a word about freedom or democracy. It does not, and it never did. That's 100% correct. What right does the United States and the West even have, given that, the United States has its own oppressed nations, and the West as well. The West, Britain still has colonies, right? They all support Israel, which is essentially a colony, a colonial power in its own right. The United States has its own oppressed nations. We're not even talking about Guam or those so-called territories, Puerto Rico, which is a colony of the United States. But inside of the borders of the United States, you have oppressed nations. You have oppressed indigenous nations, Black people at various points in political history have argued for the right to nationhood because of their status as captured people, enslaved within a territory that was not originally their own. And they were deemed not human and just property, right, to be super exploited. So the United States and the collective West, and Vladimir Putin's going to mention this, doesn't have any right to lecture. It doesn't, because the United States and the West talk all about Ukraine sovereignty, even though they staged the coup in 2014. It was their weapons, their money, staged the coup in 2014. Where was Ukraine's sovereignty then? Why couldn't the United States and the West allow Ukraine's government at that time to just stand as it was? Well, it's because the government at that time was seeking more parity with Russia, along with its relationship with the EU. So that's why it had to go. And there was no talk about sovereignty then. Now it's all about Ukraine's sovereignty. And of course, these republics, these regions with majority Russian-speaking people, the vast majority, if not entirely majority Russian-speaking people, Russian-identified people, Russians, they can't assert their right to be independent of a regime that doesn't want to see them exist anymore. So that's the logic of democracy and freedom. of the United States and the West. Western elite not only deny national sovereignty and international law, their hegemony has pronounced features of totalitarianism, despotism, and apartheid. They brazenly divide the world into their vassals, the so-called civilized countries, and all the rest, who, according to the designs of today's Western racists, should be added to the list of barbarians and savages. False labels like rogue country or authoritarian regime are already available and are used to stigmatize entire nations and states, which is nothing new. There is nothing new in this. Deep down, the Western elites have remained the same colonizers. They discriminate and divide peoples into the top tier and the rest. I mean, this is one of the most impressive parts of Putin's speech. And it's one of the most impressive parts of Putin's speech because, a lot of people like to think of Vladimir Putin as this kind of like singular figure. There's a lot of liberals and even some on the left who see him as entirely social conservative, entirely with like the Russian Orthodox and look, the Russian Orthodoxy, etc., some more traditional elements of Russian society. And look, Vladimir Putin certainly, and we'll see this in the future text of this speech, yes, he does embrace and does talk about those things to some degree. But at the same time, in describing the Western imperialist order, the US-led Western imperialist order in this way, he's also acknowledging a fundamental premise of imperialism, racism. He is literally talking about the dehumanization of entire peoples and nations for the aims of imperialism. That is the purpose of racism. And he says deep down, the Western elites are still the same colonizers in that nothing more could be true. Not only because literally the West still has colonies and still treats many countries like neo-colonies. Just look at what's happening in Haiti right now. Haiti, there's millions of people rising up, and the United States is literally gearing up to squash those protests. Already doing so, but gearing up to do so again and again and again. France controlling the currencies of many African countries that formerly called its colonies. So there are examples after examples of this. And Vladimir Putin is saying he identifies, and Russia identifies, as the target of this same racism, this same racist imperialist system, which requires this kind of dehumanization to justify the absolutely horrific policies that come with imperial domination. So Putin continues that we've never agreed and will never agree to such political nationalism and racism. What else if not racism is the Russophobia being spread around the world? What if not racism is the West's dogmatic conviction that its civilization and neoliberal culture is an indisputable model for the entire world to follow? You're either with us or against us. It even sounds strange. Western elites are even shifting repentance for their own historical crimes on everyone else, demanding that the citizens of their countries and other peoples confess to things they have nothing to do with at all. For example, the period of colonial conquest. I found this very interesting that that he says this. This is just him acknowledging the projection of the American empire, of the American-led Western imperialist empire, talking about these Western elites shift their repentance on everyone else. And that's true. Everyone else has to pay for the crimes. Everyone who doesn't deserve to pay for these crimes have to basically answer. It is worth reminding the West that it began its colonial policy back in the Middle Ages, followed by the worldwide slave trade, the genocide of Indian tribes in America, the plunder of India and Africa, the wars of England and France against China, as a result of which it was forced to open its ports to the opium trade. What they did was get entire nations hooked on drugs and purposely exterminated entire ethnic groups for the sake of grabbing land and resources, hunting people like animals. This is contrary to human nature, truth, freedom, and justice. Wow. I mean, some people call that woke, right? There's a lot of people say, oh, you can't bring that up. You can't, all that stuff, talk about the legacy. No,